당연히 동해세 난 디기 주변에 탑람되다 아주 약속이 아주 샘 교화다야데 아니 아주 삼로나리아 예와치 아니 아주 강아요야게 삼로데 카르카르도 아니 아주 동아요 디기요야게 삼로데 카네스도 시티 삼로게 예와치제 다디네 자다 삼로 아주 귤라 뇨모 가소레 동아다 강아요야게 규식인 삼로디 밤매봤어요. 고래에서 아니 되네 아니 지금 저기라 디기 주야기 아니 지금 삼로디 요규 삼로디 맞아 야 주고 고래에서 띵고 공부했던 고래에서 되네 시고로 숨 되네 자당 저기 디바세 띵아도 디바단 개화세디 소야디 안지상 저기 규기 딱 동아요야기 규 녀모바 디기 자베게다 사번나 바샤데게라 디파스고로 가슴 제부 동아여야 규시게서 데 개와세디 아는 지게 삼로 상보 안디기 주베게 유 안에 삼로 디기라 디 뉴바 안에 바샤다 사번디게라 개와세지 모두시네 저기 디파단 개와세 제사당 저 디파 샤고 그래세디 제사 동아 고고 매바자 마오바나 동아여야 유 안에 디바세디 매바서 그래서 안에 디 도초 마오바는 디기 주비에 요야기 유 삼로다 디스 that 게티야 뉴버 컴퓨터 주고 그래서 대내장의 디바샤 그래서 디바샤도 갑라 다 디바샤다 삼로간에서 땅 거래 세디 디고마가 저기 다 디바샤가 리우세 디마 주고 봐.
Good evening. So we're continuing to look at our text, the Bodhisattva's Way of Life. And it's the current chapter, the second chapter we're in, is presenting the method for the accumulation of virtue and the purification of non-virtue. And this comes about, or this is achieved, both accumulation and purification, through focusing on our mind and striving to transform our mind. So to expand on that a bit, we need to come to understand and recognize the inner causes of our suffering, those particular states of mind that lead to suffering, and we need to then strive to eliminate them. Conversely, we need to recognize the inner causes, those particular states of mind that lead to happiness, and strive to cultivate these. So these two terms, non-virtue and virtue, they come about independent on particular ways of thinking, and they have the result of ripening as either happiness or suffering. So from afflicted minds which disturb our mental state, under their influence, we may engage in physical acts or verbal acts or ongoing mental thought processes, and this leads to the accumulation of non-virtue, which when it ripens, leads to suffering. The converse is also the case. Wholesome ways of thinking, virtuous ways of thinking, minds such as love, compassion, and wisdom, when these arise, and either we strengthen them through thinking about them further or act under their influence through physical behavior or verbal communication, this leads to the accumulation of virtue, which when it ripens in happiness. So wanting to be freed of suffering, not wanting to experience any pain, problems or difficulties at all, that is the unwanted result. To ensure we do not experience such results, we need to eradicate the causes of our suffering. And similarly, wanting to attain happiness, in particular, lasting, stable happiness, that is a result, and to achieve that result, one needs to strive to accumulate those causes. Hence then, this chapter started with the accumulation of virtue, and now we're in the second main part of the chapter, which is on purification, how to purify our mind.
Ngosh chobore nyenje se deli chapeke chapake da andi wonge nga ju divatamara na so sagores di na shin dai ni nga di nge ye chawores ane nge ye ane Ni Dawore, Ni Bunyada, Ni Ninji Dawores, and Nella and Dawaje, Migawaje, and Jetaji, Divongate, Tibetamara, Sagore was to Sagores, Chesa Dineza, Tangazuki, Sagor, the Inner Tanga, Zawada, Mizawa Sada, Nienda, Jawa Sada, Sosoran to do Shishimjivena, Ma Nigichik, my chick Zone, my Juorone, Chikmeva Charugores, Chesa Kandina Chasa. Meva Charugor Mado, Nanajuki, Sampi Yuri Delia, and the Yama Dine Jure, and I didn't Jure say, Jambi Yudu Samado, and the Kichikima Yuati Rugore, kissing on Tuki, and the Nigi Shurua, the Nigi Juor, the Nigi Nada, the Nigi Diva Savadi, the Nigi sometimes Diva Shagores, the Nigi Tigor Mashurua.
Last week we looked at 3 verses. And to summarize them briefly, we have attachment for those whom we are close to, our dear friends and our loved ones. And due to this attachment we have for them, we engage in the accumulation of non-virtue. With attachment being an affliction, it afflicts our mind and leads to accumulation of non-virtue. But for those that we dislike, a different affliction, that of anger, tends to arise. And through anger, we also accumulate non-virtue. So if we look at the situation honestly, we'll come to recognize that those to whom we have a sense of closeness towards, those that we like, and those that we have a dislike for and we want to repel, this differing attitude towards the 2 of them is not so dependent on them, but rather on whether they are acting in accordance with our wishes. Because our wishes change so easily, those who are friends can become enemies, those who are enemies can become friends. And moreover, we recognize that through these various relationships, we have accumulated so much non-virtue, either driven by attachment or by non-virtue. And those relationships, all at one point, come to an end. Whether it's during the course of our life, when we lose contact with someone, or when their life comes to an end, or our life comes to an end, those relationships will cease. And the pleasurable times that we had with them, or the unhappy times we had with them, they'll all just become like dreams, nothing more than a memory. But what will remain with us and travel from lifetime to lifetime is the virtue and non-virtue that we accumulated in relation to them. So all this non-virtue, this will continue to accompany us from lifetime to lifetime, despite those relationships have come to an end. Therefore, we need to purify that non-virtue from our continuum, cleanse our mind from the causes of suffering.
Miza namja meyo, miza nam, miza wa suso, zawa ma benyin, zawa miza namja meyo shin, zawa namja mevar gyur, daja mevar gyur de, deshin tamja mevar gyur, milam nyamso nyongwa shin, ngobo kanda kanche ba, dede tenbi yudu gyur, deba tamja tongme gyur sen, dikasin du shurwa, zige shi nidwa, miza namja meyo shin, miza wa sen. 제사 니 소소 미자와 세야되게 매와 저루고레스 안 자오 소소이 니도 되게 매와 차고레 다장 소소이 내 매와 차루고레스 탐제 매와 디신 탐제 매와 뒤지 용어바 탐제 지니 매와 저루고레스 제사 지유도 안 가래서네 데링한도 닐람게 밀람니 냠소녀 와신도 다 녀마 되는지 요래 사지마도 네 나를 막아가지 나를 자오 되는지 요래 나를 닌 되는지고 요래 선비게 전부 유도 유와 잠마도 다들 양은 저기 두시네 네 통는 것도 네 통야다 뭐서 기시에 가요 말와서 진짜 밀람 나시레스 밀람 니가서 통도 이세요도 가요 말와서 니 되는지 통서 라마도 전부 유도 여봐서마도 무인에서도 요말와서지 밀람 나시레 제사 다디 내가블라 녀마 차상 가사지 다 전부 유도 되는 녀마 되는지 요래서마도 내가 탐주 통미 유스다도 통야게 녀마 사사데 다된 아주 통야 가요 말에 저르다.
Of the 3 verses we looked at last time, these second 2, 35th and 36th, I'll just repeat them because the meaning matches very closely with what I've just presented. Those whom I dislike will all cease to be. Everyone I care for will also cease to be. Even I will cease to be. Everyone and everything will all cease to be. Just like an experience in a dream, each and everything I interact with will just become memories. All that has passed will not be experienced again. So the meaning of these two verses is that all those that we either dislike or those whom we like, our relationship with them will cease. They themselves will cease. Likewise, all the displeasurable situations we've had, or the pleasurable situations, they will all cease. And not only them, but so too will I. So therefore, the first line is that all those I dislike will cease to be. The second, even everyone I care for will cease to be. And the fourth, everyone and everything. So all those joyful or awful experiences we had, they will all cease to be. And then the third line, I too will cease to be. Then the next verse, just like an experience in a dream. So where a dream is merely the ripening of an imprint. That's all. It's a ripening of an imprint. It seems very real to us whilst we're in the dream, but it's nothing more than the ripening of an imprint. There's an appearance which we believe to be true. When we wake, we very easily recognize that that appearance is false. And then just as this verse continues, each and everything I interact with will just become memories. So all our loved ones and all that we did with them and all those whom we dislike and everything that we engaged in because of them, all those activities will just become memories. And the final line, all that has passed will not be experienced again. It's just memories, but all that will remain are the imprints.
Reshik said the Naga Prince of Sosubi, the Sumbu Yubi, Sosu Mashiba Jangazu Naga, Yubi Ringle, some Dabine, Reshik Sunse Dinila, Zada Misa Dumade, Sidu, Sosugi, Naga, Sumbu Yubi Rindela, some Dabine, Sosola, Jig, Java Mete, Mia, Mangushi, Shiduaja, and Tonguduas, Shigduas, says Soso in Yidu, Sosu, washing by Java Bede, she made a child, Meva Chadovade, and the Tonguduas or Reshi Sunse Dinila, Setela, Sunbo, Seringba, Soso Mashiba, Debi Ring Dinila, and the Sosugi Zawo in there, and Meva Chadoyada, Mizo and Meva Deva said that, Sele Deja, Meva Chadovati, and the Tonguduas or that.
Moving to the next verse, the 37th verse. So just reading the first two lines. Even within this brief lifetime itself, so many friends and foes have passed away. So this is something we've all experienced. So many loved ones, those that we hold dear, have passed away. So either they have left this life or they have passed out of our life. We've lost contact with them. Similarly, with those whom we dislike or foes. So many of them have passed as well. And again, in the same way, either passed from this life or we have lost contact with them. And this we can recognize over the brief expanse of this life, however many decades our individual life has been, we can already see how this in reality is the case.
You do something that is a chicken and caravan or something dances about that Chizawadi, Shidu, Mizawadi, Shidu Wore, and Ryan Shidu Wore, and Diri Sosu Yubikabla, Chigasosu Zawada, Mizawa, Shidu, among Tongu said, the was came into a dion, caravan or Dingas or some dancing over.
It's quite possible you hear this and think, why are we even talking about this? It's a little macabre. But it's also kind of obvious. We know that those that we are close to, some have passed, and those that haven't, well, they will die. And likewise, those whom we dislike, some have died and the others will. This seems kind of obvious. So why are we even looking at this?
nga zo samlo na la gar ko dos di samlo dang tha di ti da ma ri ba ra chu chi go ba nga zo sam na la gar ko wa se ne bin nga so so sam da o nga lo nye ma chi chi yo re lo nye ma yo re chi chi lo chi chim ba ni je ba se nga di je ba ka sang nga di je ba ni nga ta nga do yin chi chi go ba nga zo sam na la gar yo se ne nga se de nye ma ne yue de gen yue de ba ji gyune yuo de da pa chi ma chi ba ji yue de ba do jing sam de ko go lo ba dine nga sanyi chi zhu gui ni zhu gui ne lo jie ma chi zhu gui se che xie meng bu de nga de zo ye me nga de lo jie ma de de meng bu de de gen ti dian yuo gyune ma zhuo da pa dian bu ji de de ge sam lo ji ko go lo ba di sam lo de da zhen re so da pa zhe me da zhen ji go le jie san di nga zu sam lo de no chu re so jie san wo zhe di ji go le jie san da pa dian bu yo ma le jie san nga zu ge nian ma de ge jie san ji sa da de de le yo ma le nyama dembe yudu gyuwa ma do ngone de yo ma res jesa nyama chi da se ji sa ru su long ma de ji thong ya yo ma lo da wang ma de thong ya ma de ne ji di ri ma ji ban sang ka sang de se de yang de di rin sam dan de thong ya ma ka sang de zhao yin da de yin da da di rin an zu ngone tu ge xie xue ma ka sa de ne yo re sam ma ka sang an zu thong ya ge zhou sa ge sa jia da de ne di rin an zu du shi ne 매래 생각도 디 템베가 가상한 된 조바레스 마도 템베 유도 좀 마도 제가 디스마 지제기지기지 지는 유어두고레스 제가 유어 마도 와제 두고 말레스 나도 삼나나 안 삼모 가르코스는 유어기니 마도 와제 그 무디지 예도 바르지 땡자 예도 바 삼던 거래 디 삼로데 따진 레스 디 노트레스 제가 디 삼로디 따진 인바디 노트 인바디 모트제 돈달라 안지 지루고 매바 차고서 송고에도 김전으로 뒤차고래
There's actually a reason of great importance why we need to think about this, even though it seems so obvious. And this is because, if I take myself, but really it will be the case for any of us here, if we think about what we did yesterday, what we did last month, what we did last year or last decade, we'll have these memories in which, in our memory, we have the starring role, and we believe that the me that is here now, it's the same person as yesterday, as last week, last month, last year, last decade. We relate to ourselves as being something permanent, in that, something that is unchanging. This is how we innately or naturally relate to things, including ourselves, our I. So we believe that the I of today, of yesterday, of last month and last decade, it's the same, unchanging. But not only with relation to the past, but also to the future. When we think about our plans for tomorrow and next week and next year and perhaps next decade, we see ourselves as having the starring role in all of that, but that self we relate to as if it is identical to the self of now. This is completely mistaken, but that's not how it appears to us. It appears to us as if the self, going from the past to the present and again to the future, there is an unchanging or a permanent basis to this. And we grasp at that. Our mind grasps at the self as being permanent, as being unchanging. And this is not how the self and most other things exist. It is a completely faulty way to think. And this we need to recognize and strive to abandon. We need to reflect deeply on impermanence. And what the text is guiding us in here is some very simple, straightforward ways to recognize impermanence or momentary change. And then we can be encouraged in our meditation to take that to a deeper level. Because we also relate to friends and foes, as well as past events, as being unchanging in the way that we remember them, we believe is how they exist. In the way we experience something, we believe is how it exists. Whereas in reality, those people and events change momentarily. Immediately they changed, and between then and now, they've changed significantly. And the events, they've long gone out of existence. It was a one-off thing, and it's gone. So it only exists now as a mere memory. And that is not in accordance with how it exists, because we believe it to exist in a way that is permanent, whereas in fact it changes. Our body, from what we remember, has changed. Our body right now is changing on a cellular level continuously. So too our mind, and therefore characteristics of the mind such as personality change. As do external phenomena, they too change momentarily. But we relate to things as existing in the way that we once experienced them. And this is a grasping at permanence. And this we need to counteract. So this reflection here on impermanence serves as a starting point for us to go even deeper and challenge and eventually abandon our consciousness that grasps at things as being permanent.
tempo jinde taba jimbe tazen chale di lohe res jesu digi jesu drabe dini ki tazen digi lo di jesu drane lega lebe na te lega de ane ya bo chungo ma res ya dini zada bene du shine anzu midaba imbe ngoche chi gore jezang anzu ngui nisu de kane shore lamna kichi gyudan yen le tene gyudan yen le tene ge deni ma kichi gyo ro de genchi ma do gyo ma do ba Tiendu ne dugan zaogine yo marda sedi dima mocheji go wa dang zule. Tisa di ma xing ba di xing gu re di ha gu re ne su di ni shi se nga zu gi mi ne tang ne su di ngui ni su la ka re kichi yo zhe ting ji ma do yo ma zhe ba ne ji zaogine yo ma re. Tisa kichi yo zhu go re. Tisa di yo zhu go wa se di ba mocheji go da. Gyudan Jen la tene kye wa rwa, ngobu duji chesan Gyudan Jen la tene kye, Gyudan Jen la tene kye ne, tene pa kichi ji zhuwan che res, chesan nga zuki, nguye ne su di, nga zuki duji che pongpo tang nga zune, nguye ne su di tene shire, di nga zu ha gu che gore, xing gu gore se gore.
Our body, our mind, and in fact all compounded phenomena, these change momentarily. But this is not how they appear to us. They appear to us as if they do not change momentarily. And this shows a level of confused ignorance within us, this lack of knowledge. And even if we've heard this before, intellectually we may understand it, but it hasn't been integrated in that knowledge does not guide us. Rather, we continue to relate to things that are impermanent as being permanent. And this grasping at permanence is a wrong consciousness, meaning it's contrary to reality. Being a wrong consciousness, when it influences us, we make mistakes. And this then leads to problems, suffering, and difficulties being experienced. So this wrong consciousness that grasps at things that change momentarily as if they are static, unchanging, this wrong consciousness we need to abandon. And to abandon it, we need to recognize that all these phenomena are impermanent, meaning that they change momentarily. And because they are impermanent, they are dependent arisings, dependent on causes. And that this, in reality, is how they exist. They change momentarily. They are dependent arisings, dependent on causes. So we need to reflect on this, because how phenomena exist in reality is not how they appear to our mind. The way they appear to our mind is contrary to how they exist in reality. They appear as permanent. So again, when we think of past events, we believe them to exist in that way, but everything has changed so. So we need to reflect deeper on impermanence and dependency on causes, because this will enable us to recognize how our aggregates, our body and mind, and all compounded phenomena actually exist, how they exist in reality, and thereby we'll be able to let go of, abandon this grasping at permanence.
Andu shene nga zuki hago ure se da nga du shene simju re chebe nga zuki nga zu susana lo nyema yorbes no yor lagruwa dade nga lo nye nga zule kyo lo nyema yorbes no yores lagruwa nga yor samgi yor labigi samno nala yor sembe samno yor da ine lo nyema ge nga de dan dade nga ni ji ge na kunyi cheju yorwa lo nyema de ben long opji ba ina dade ngup중 아직 있네. 로니마는 ngupisa 말이야. ngup중 아직이 군이 제가 로직이 켜버 열어봐다. 제가 다든가 녀마 열어라면 다든 ngup중 아직 제바데 녀마 열어서 자고로 와디 ngup중 요마르와. 제가 니네 삼다나 롱아마기디 다든가 롱아마 열어베스네 영원히디 다들 요마 롱ngup중 아직 제바디 롱아마 요마래. 롱아마데 ngup중 아직 ngupisa 마 자고로 와. 어디 나신도 스마진 되네. 다왕야마 유겐데 요르베스는 디아메르와 다데 다왕야마 유겐데 다데 요르베스네 디아메르와 고두 신진 도스 마삼단도 지루고 되네게 지기지바 되네 가사 여바데 디링메 대진예를 까마 추지직니 여바데 다데 삼 추지디 삼단 메티스자 제베 유도 삼니 교와레 도스마 교르 지루오레세 도시네 지코 지루고 여바데 삼단도 갑라 안데 가르 팽고레세나 오 당아 님뭐 디바사 샤바디게 디바디게 다다다 마샤바이나 안다디 두수 유디 베카블야 마샤바이나 아니 고 두수 지로데 제리아 샤야 고 마라나 아니 지 디비테보디 아니 마오바니 용어 치게 제사 디네자 다 계지계지게 두순 유어디 지루고 남미스네 시루고레 제사 디네자 다다 마 대보 통보 예배값량이 디바디 샤기 산베게 두치네 삼다체네 디바 샤고레 해서지 중국어다 단단히 보디
As a starting point to engage in this investigation, and I encourage you to do so, because to understand it's easy enough, but to integrate it takes effort. So one can start by asking yourself the question, was I alive last year? And of course the answer will be yes. But what we're trying to challenge is this feeling of the self or the I of last year and now being the same. So we immediately can remind ourselves of our age. So let's say last year you were 50 years old, now you're 51. There has been change. I am not the same as a year ago. I'm not identical. That person of a year ago and now is not the same. And then so too with last month and this month. Yesterday and today, this afternoon and tonight. To try and challenge, what we're trying to do is challenge this grasping at permanence of believing in relation, for example, to the self, that the person I remember is the same person as now. And so how this then fits in with our topic here is we need to recognize that past non-virtues, these that we have accumulated, I need to purify them now whilst I have the chance and not delay, because this life is impermanent. I relate to this life as if it is permanent, thinking I have time, thinking there are decades ahead, and therefore I can procrastinate. This we need to challenge. So by reminding ourselves of our own impermanence, we use this as an impetus to strengthen our resolve, to engage in purification with sincerity, and to do so now and repeatedly.
Dene dang juma do sine jije jije ando sine ma shi sine meba charu gores zawa da nye da rangi na den charu gores dene ma shi de song yorwa dene za dang na ya ya sammu na la kar ko gores na o da nene diwa da nyema diwa diba chigi dige nga chiro na nga meba charu gore de diba chage de diba de nyom de meba charu gore de diba de nyong go ya kai mi do wa sen be di sha go ya kai mi do ka sen nga ki ma ji de meba charu de shi do de diba de meba charu gore was de ne diba sha go ya kai mi do was me korong ge meba charu ge nga zo gang zo meba su go ya ge ka le ja wo mi do sen be ge sam no di yung gru wa.
And a doubt that also needs to be addressed is when one reflects in the way that's guided here, one recognizes that all those that one is close to either have or will die. All those that one dislikes either have or will die, as will we. So the doubt then that may follow is, well, if death is certain to come, then my body will cease to be, this life will become a memory. So what about all the non-virtue accumulated in this life? Will that also become non-existent? And if so, why bother with purification?
Korongi semdi yun kiji chima yun tuni rugor kiji chima yun rugor and ko gyuo rugu ko yun ji rugor ba manda dangbo di paji kiji niba rugor kiji niba ji sumba de shiba le do sine kiji ma yun tuni rugor ba chesa dine zan dibi debo de ngan ju ki semi tin de yue de ren za de sungor da den ma chi de la anyele ma yun tuni rugor do ma shu sina ji do.
So in brief, whilst this body will cease, the continuum of the mind will continue. The body of this life will be left behind, but this mind will continue into the next body. So our mind changes moment by moment. And when we exhale for the last time in this body, that body gets left behind. But the mind continues to change moment by moment and will enter into a new body. So in this way, the continuum of our mind continues from one life to the next.
The Ladio res or Jumia Ladio res Ganda and Deta Dundu Chipi Dixie, so get Sawada, Mizawada, Rangi, Dundala Chipi, Diva Sa, Chipi, Dibi, Jebu, Diva, Cutiki, Sabondan, Ma Cutiki, Nedio res. Says I didn't ever send Jebu Miseba, bottom of a Yongo Edikia, Dunda near Sedda, Mohobana, Yongo Egi, Nedio res. Diva the Mashabache, Mashabaina, and Diva Mashabaina. The Diba Chibi Jebuta, Yongo Agi, and the Ladio res, Caresene, Dibigi, Diba and the Dibigi, nobody, and the Semgit to Shagorba. Chesan Semgiti Shawaza, Dini Diba Mashabache, do Shabaina, the name on the Shirobina, and the Sendima, Kichi Chimachima, Ma Kiwachima Ruyo Baza, Di Teduda, nobody, Dibati and Dita Yobaza, Digi Jebu, Yoadi, Taladio res.
The verse concludes with the next two lines. But the negativities I committed for or to them still lie unbearable before me. When we leave this body and arise in our new body, our continuum continues from this old body into the new one. And what accompanies our continuum is the imprints from our past virtuous and non-virtuous misdeeds. So when death comes, all the innumerable non-virtuous imprints on our continuum that we have not purified in this life, they will accompany us into our next life. So the potency or the potential for these imprints that to ripen in suffering will accompany us. So therefore, all these unbearable suffering results still await us in our future life, because those imprints on our continuum, if we do not purify them, will accompany us.
안에 자당 왕아 저기 디바디게 지당아 저기 그 라다 셰 뒤슈체 담지 기지기마 지지마 유지 매바 아니면 지금 마 시트 매바 차루고르데 이나 니기 셈데야 기지기지 유와 두고르 지 nga마 조아체 치마치마 마 사바 두고르 지자 디네자 시네 매바 두고르데 이나 셈유 균치마디 누구여바엔자 디바데 마샤바 있나 디비 제보디 마오바는 용고에 차그레 디네자 다 니게 디바디 두스네 지게 마샤네 탑면다데 내가 디니가 순비 링델이야 마시바 되베 링이래야 디바디 샤기 삼제 두두시네 샤고고레제다 디니게 두션 삼로 당하로 디니 삼당지네 남산 디바 샤고레사지 순고레.
What we see here, taking this and the previous verses, is that we will cease to be, so will all others, and all phenomena, everything and everyone, will all cease to be. But the non-virtue that we accumulated for their sake, the non-virtue we accumulated for the sake of our loved ones, the non-virtue we accumulated when reacting towards our foes, all of those imprints will accompany us into our next rebirth. And they will ripen into problems, suffering, and difficulties, unless we apply ourselves to purify our mind stream of them from right now.
Adine ronda nimo dire. Adine dedar dagi lobur she dagi tokpar magyurbe timu chadan shedangi diba namba dumaches.
In the 38th verse, in the same way, suddenly I too will pass. Due to not realizing this, through ignorance, attachment, and anger, I have so often committed non-virtues of so many sorts.
Dedara dani lobur she sere dagi tokpar magyurbes. Chizanda dedara sene dejinyeleya 저게 자오다 미자와는 뉴지나 탐적이 녀마치단 지시에 아니 가네 아니 저기 레비 유도 잠마도 안다데 내가 소통해 가요 말해서 말 가지고 쉐르와다 손으로와 제산 대대로선 네 손바 나시 다니 로브르와레스 다니 로브르시 소소라 로브르와 유단 견라 되는 중 아니 마 유단 견라 되는 가로바데 딱보 템부메 로브르와라는 지 규된 견라 되는 마 중요데 규된 견라 마 가로원자 로브와 템부메 봐서 딱보 템부메 봐디 아니 기지기지 지바 딱보 템부메 봐 기지기지 지로 봐디 로브와디 다게 똑바로 마규 봐서 이게 또요 말해서 세상이 또고 말 세상 마도 봐서 가르섬선에 저기 기지기지 지시마 가로 봐 미다 봐 임바디 마도 봐서 저기 나마다 다데다 직답 템부지니 다선도 여러 봐 세상 마도 봐서 또요 말해서 제달 다게 로브르시 다게 똑바로 마규 봐서
Look at the first two lines. In the same way, suddenly I too will pass. So in the same way refers to what we've looked at previously, that everyone and everything will all cease to be. And this is certain to come to pass. And so too will I cease to be. And the reason for this is because this life has come about in dependence on causes. And because it's come about in dependence on causes too change momentarily. They lose, or when the causes ripen, they ripen into this life. This life is the result of causes, came about in dependence on causes. And so the result of this life changes momentarily, and eventually the strength or the force of this life runs out, and this life suddenly comes to an end. So therefore, that suddenly I too will pass shows the instability of this life, that at any time this life may well end. But this is something that we have yet to realize. We may understand it, but we have yet to give rise to an understanding that actually radically transforms how we live our life. Because the way we currently still live is as if we have time, with this belief that our life won't suddenly come to pass. We still have time. And this is because of our ignorance, grasping at permanence, grasping at this life as being permanent, as not changing momentarily.
Giji jibe mitaba de matobanza, matobares, matobanza dimuk sedan, matobanza di matoba de mong hamoa de dimuk seurada, that de dimuk sede. Is that the dimuk sedela sim ranshin juba majuba de mamoa ranshin juba resemble samno de dimuk charu. That the giji jibe giji jibadi. Jiwa ngō di ngā zuki dushūki chue kade nā kiji jiro ba di ngō di nishi yinpa chila ngā zu di yinpa ha mōgwa che pa chiki tākwa zimba tenpu rā tākwa rā zindio ba yinna di dimuk siyo rā dimuk siyo ha mōgwa dimuk siyo chisan di mā tōpa ha mōgwa yu kienchi dimuk di wānga kienchi nē an gar chi wā sā nē rāngi nyi yu chola chakwa kia tā an shin rāngi la mā kawi ki shen yu chola ya tāngwa tuyo chi kōntro kia tā tēne ki an kōntro kia dimuk diwange chada chabada tangwa kondake ani diba namba naso chese chesa diba namba dibe namda mangbu dene sagore jere sagore.
The reason we have not realized that we too will suddenly die, we too are we change momentarily and therefore are impermanent, is because of this confused ignorance that grasps at us as permanent. This is the third line, through ignorance. This particular ignorance is the ignorance of not knowing, of lacking knowledge. So this is why we are in this position we are in. So we grasp at ourselves as permanent, but we can also understand this as grasping at ourselves as being naturally existent. So we don't yet realize that ourselves and all phenomena are or lack any natural existence or existing by way of its own essence. And because of this ignorance, believing that the self is permanent, and believing that situations are permanent and other phenomena are permanent, not realizing that they are dependent on causes, we give rise to attachment, wanting to fulfill our needs, and anger, wanting to protect ourselves, push things away, repel them. So from this stream from ignorance leading to attachment and anger, we accumulate so much non-virtue.
Geshe Mushu Chawar Mitaba Mona Yamlin Javalada, Chisan Mitapa said in Isudi, Sinjanzuki Semengava Niku Lam Jule Javala, Chisan Dine Zang to Lamrim Chimbo, Lamrim Nale, Dambonga Zukmani, Chikivishin, Jen Sarnadisma, Lam Yirimba Shedu, Chiwa Mitapa, Sesungurua, Chisan Chiwa Mitapas. Then Mitapa Della, Rakpa, and then Ma Chara Mitapa, Netamo. Jeudushin some nair, Chesandineza, Mitapa said, Mitapa Chamodan as a Haku, Tihamo again Chagore. Chesandanga, Mitapa Rapa, Rapa using as a Haku, Penjima, Sabelma, Taptinea, Nuguria, Cherchege, Teneco Medosha, Tene Jevota, and Gazamjela Gamje, Anchik Torbat, Lore Ganzunia Hogi, Tishi to study, Lore Relias, Chikpa, Chikia, Magic, and Ma Gamjin, Ma Sadra, Guru Badi, Nanjuki Bata, Shasa Hagu, Wata, Tisati Rapa, Guru Hagu. In a Nanzuki, Diniga Rapa, the Hagu, the now some Karatango Marson, partially Tundo and Disulia, you are to go, but then you are to go, then you are Diniki or then you are Lose, then Diga, she or said some time, she or them. Dig you are the Sosolia, Kakocha, Sosolia, you are to have some Tango, Dia Combo Chago. Di Combo Chavi, you and Chick Chago, you and Chileda.
The understanding of impermanence is really of great importance. In fact, to cultivate a path that leads to liberation or enlightenment, a prior understanding of impermanence is essential. So we take the Lamrim text, such as the great Lamrim. In there, the foundational chapter is that on how to rely on the spiritual teacher. Thereafter, immediately follows the presentation on impermanence in general, and in particular, though, in relation to the impermanence of this life. So this shows how, right at the beginning of our spiritual training, we need to focus on understanding impermanence. And impermanence, in general, there are two levels to impermanence, that of coarse and subtle. Coarse impermanence, we have an understanding of this. Things break, things grow, we plant something, it sprouts, a plant grows further, and eventually it will wither and die. So this level of impermanence is something that we understand. But we take that as the starting point, and immediately we need to look at subtle impermanence, meaning momentary change, that everything is changing momentarily. It doesn't require our observation for it to be changing at a cellular level. And when we engage in this reflection on impermanence, you must be sure not just to reflect on the outer material world, but one also needs to reflect on ourselves, our body, our mind, our sense of self. We need to reflect on impermanence in relation to oneself. Because certainly in terms of the general world, this is easier to understand, but where it's of particular importance is towards one's body and mind.
Dine za de di nga ju samdang ya so ya ji ka ko che ane ji ge du chine yo zhe da de chi samdang ne ji shan chi wo mi da hua se de du chine nie ma de ne ma ju du chine ni me ji zuo zhu guo ba de ne ge sam dang gu ra di nga ju ge ji ge dang ma tu mi da hua cha mo se de ji ge le tu guo ma ba ji shan chi wo mi da hua ji ya wo zhe ma du na ane ko wa le ya ko wi dungal에 탈되기 안 지금 예중의 삼바디 야고리 두고 말해서 중국어로 되네 자당한 주기 되네게 삼당어데 예침보 최고로와 되네 자당 소소하게 소소라랑에 된 아랑이 냠냠 바바 셰베네 로바 침보로 최고로 되네 소소의 삼날야 지게 롤 바비기 두 시스템 달로 숨주소라지리 쉽지 나로를 제야 삼비 디도를 나와라 코드도와 지사디 겐고의 책이어 받에 삼르셔 리도문도와 지사 딩안 주게 삼르 제셔를 두시네 대디 소소의 삼 소소라 나는 제 두시네 삼다베나 두시네다 지게 요조여 받에 삼다베 두chen 삼다베네네 디삼다의 가르레세네 요조여 삼다요도 오다가 디바샤에는 디바디게 샤오다 샤야 고가 뒤슬레샤데 샤오도 선배게 샘주파야 디바샤야야 샘주파야다 아니 지 꾸마제에게 팽거와 진짜 니네기 꾸마제 팽면에 디바샤에게 샤야도 아니 디 제부의 마음반은 용고야 차가 말아 니네 자디 케벤디로와 딱 니네기 꾸마 마샤바 샤샤반 아 먹어지 도나라 가야 마제반에 디바 마샤바 샤샤반에 엔 제부의 마음반은 용고야 차기로와 근데 누가 용고야 차기로 되는다 아주 두삼단에 마음반에 누가 고고와 말에 누가 먹어야는 다된 두선 삼단에 디바샤 고래 세림 이제다 미다비게 두신에 삼단한테 송거래 디가 소 디네 치워미다바디게 송거로 와다 람림나 세반에 치워미대냐면 송아 디나지 지버리도 와다 치워미다바 삼다제 니 디바샤 고래 해서지
What we're seeing here is really the same as we find in the Lamrim on the presentation on death and impermanence, or the impermanence of life, which has as a fundamental awareness that death is certain, but the time and manner of our death is completely unknown. And this is a fundamental reflection within the stages in which to train one's mind in order to gain liberation, because the cultivation of an actual mental path depends on the generation of definite emergence or renunciation. And without having realized death and impermanence, one will be unable to give rise to a realization of definite emergence. This is because the realization of death and impermanence leads to a strength of mind, a focused mind. And this is essential to be able to accumulate the causes that are required to abandon the grasping at this life and strive for liberation. So one has to reflect on death and impermanence to give rise to a determined outlook, not to waste what remains of this life. So in our context here, this is about purification, the need to apply ourselves to purification now, not to delay, because death could well come before we actually engage in sufficient purification. So something here that we can also look at to try and get a feel for the way that we relate to things as being permanent is right now, you look at your own age, and especially if you are a bit in years, is that how you really feel about yourself, how you really relate to yourself? Certainly on the mental level, do you relate to yourself as someone whose mind has changed so much over this life? Or do you generally feel that I'm much younger than I am? Which perhaps shows a lack of awareness to this passage of time that we've all been through thus far in this life. So again, the purpose in this context of reflecting on impermanence is to spur us to purify, because now we have the opportunity to eradicate the imprints from previously accumulated non-virtue and to put an end to the accumulation of new non-virtue. And this is a method to radically transform our situation, our future lives, now while we have the opportunity to reduce and eradicate the suffering that will be experienced in our future lives. And it's the reflection on impermanence that encourages us to strive in transforming our minds now.
Zada denegi jugi metabegi jibe yuwa du sine samdan de zan jugi duji ge cheden je rakba samdana giji jibe duji ge ranshin re sa giji jibe ranshin ma da giji ba ma ji ba ani tembu she ta ba ne de ge ga yo ma re sa du chine samda ji ge je de ne giji jiba yi ba de ha wo da giji ji de 지금 유도가 받아 세보라시 기지 지도 받아 하고도 안에 가라 디게 가르게 지고서는 디게 라신이 말로 동반이 또 발해야 샤라 시우 팽거로 받아 디 가선 기지 지는 유화매 봐 유도에 통해도 딱바 템부매 봐 나와 나시지 매되게 다도 진 삼마이 집차를 봐좀 삼다되데 유다 견치라 되네 눕되게 and good and gain let in the Java, gain let gain again, Shangela doing about Jijuba Garu, but the Naha Shen, do about the Yawoji Hakoyon. Did do about Haya, Shimji, Pachi, Jinning the Samro Mana, and it's none of the same sometimes. Kahana and Madu, a whole ranking when you do by now, do by Odina and Ashin, the Mindua, some big some of the Lea, Tombani Topala, Shuji, Digi. 판도용 거래. 제가 되네 자다 곧 탑란 마소나 동반이 또에게 남는 냠링이 림바바 길이게 지는 라반 마도 소세 티기 지는 마 참모들 마 송여디 되네 레라와 동고디와 용거로와 되네자 당보 치와 미다바세 되네 시위가 되네 시루거라세 셰바는 안주바 디라바라바 하고 두고라데 녀만의 신든 마시 시루거바데 소소 하고 그러와 되네 삼다다 시와 되네 아직 마기지기지 딜레 차르다 기지기지 지루거래 가상키니 롱아마디게 다데 삼다나 템비 유도 규범마도 다데 내가 통하여 말 가사래 시장 가상에 세야디게 다데 디링 그 삼단 디링이 뒤서 통하여 말 가사래서도 마 차차래서와 단 다데 삼다면은 다데야 기지기지 대신이래 먼저 주지지 인예래 대용교디 이 다데 삼단은 가사요 말서도 두슨 마 뒤서 통도 차차차 삼다데 근데 라바 참모디기 봐 자고 해도 안디기 견제는 근데 제가 라신이 맞죠 동반이 담에 봐 동반이 또 봐라야 근데 지게 배 타녀는 요 줘야 비슈 핑거로 되네 자당 저기 두스네 미다베고 삼담고래서 디송도.
To give you further encouragement to really apply yourself to the meditation on impermanence, both in relation to the impermanence of this life and impermanence more generally. So the first major reason that I presented was that without having reflected well on subtle impermanence, one will not give rise to a definite emergence, one will not generate a path within oneself. Further reason is that through reflecting on impermanence, again in particular subtle impermanence, this greatly aids one's meditation on emptiness. Because when one meditates on impermanence, one will meditate on all impermanent phenomena, such as material, anything in the material world, our own physical body, our minds, and so forth. And one will recognize that we relate to them as if they are very stable. But we know that these phenomena will all end. So we have an understanding of course impermanence. But then we reflect deeper to remind ourselves of subtle impermanence, that all these phenomena are changing momentarily, even if it's unobservable. This then, as we come to gain certainty in our understanding of subtle impermanence, we can then remind ourselves that while something appears to my mind as being unchanging, as permanent, as being unchanging, that may be how it appears to my mind. That's not how it exists. It does not exist as being unchanging, permanent, but rather it changes momentarily, impermanent. So therefore the way the phenomena appears to my mind is not how it exists in reality. It is empty of existing in the way that it appears to my mind. So in this way, we use the reflection on impermanence to aid our understanding of emptiness. Further way that one uses the reflection on impermanence to aid one's understanding of emptiness is when one reflects that what appears to one's mind appears to be unchanging. It appears as if it were permanent. But this is not how it exists. It is actually, not only does it change momentarily, but it is dependent on causes. Something that is permanent would not be dependent on causes. But this is dependent on causes. And because it's dependent on causes, it is empty of existing by way of its own nature. So in the second way, one can use one's reflection on impermanence to aid one's understanding of emptiness. And from this then, you can see why in the sequence for training one's mind as presented in the Lamrim, the reflection on permanence is placed long before the reflections on emptiness, because a stable understanding of subtle impermanence will greatly aid one's later meditation on emptiness. And moreover, when one's engaging in these meditations, using impermanence to aid one's reflection on emptiness, when you remind yourselves that all past events, they appear to my mind in a way that's permanent. The way we remember it is how we believe it to have existed, in an unchanging manner. But that appears in that way, but it doesn't exist in that way. Or if we recall someone, not just an event, someone, we believe that the way that we recall them to be, we remember them to be, is how they are. But they have changed so much over the intervening period. So therefore they do not exist in the way they appear. They are empty of existing in the way that they appear.
아니네 인마 인제 되바 예메바 세디 따도 괴규르싱 녀바 귀네 옹메나 다다 치브르 지메규르스.
Cameron, if you could do the board, thank you. So just moving then to the 39th verse. day and night, without pause, my life constantly drains away. And as there can be no adding to what has declined, why would someone like me not die? Starting with the first line, day and night without pause. Every day passes into night, and each night then passes into day. Each session, each day as it passes, it's gone, it's completed. And then the new night starts, but that soon, when it passes into day, will be gone, will be completed, will be finished. So likewise now the second line, my life constantly drains away. So similarly, our life too constantly passes. We can divide our life into various periods or segments, either quite expansive in time or into short periods, maybe just some hours or minutes. But however we divide it, each segment passes from one into the next. It's finished and it's completed. This comes about, we come to recognize this through reflecting on subtle impermanence, on momentary change, where we come to see that there is no stable abiding. This appearance of stable abiding is an illusion. Momentary change shows us that there is no stable abiding. One moment passes into the next. Every moment of the day passes into the next. Eventually, the day in its entirety passes into the night. Each moment of the night passes into the next. There is no abiding, and eventually the night passes completely into the new day. So too, with each segment of our lives, our body and our mind too changes momentarily. There is no abiding. There is only constant change. The appearance of abiding is illusory. Both our body and mind constantly changes. And the verse concludes with, as there can be no adding to what has declined, why would someone like me not die? Not only does our body and mind change momentarily, but this lifespan is draining away. And there's no way that this process can be delayed, no way it can be postponed, nothing can be added. All that will happen is our lifespan continues to decline or to fade away. So therefore, there's no reason that someone like ourselves will not die.
Kare sungora sene du chene nga zo keji jibi gyudo ba du chene samda je susulya du chen da nimi chi shi du re sembe da ma shi nye le ya da du sene ta ba timbu yo ma re che sa mi da ba re keji gyuji shi du re da shi ba na me ba cha go ma re yun chi ma ne ma du wor was dine sa da che sa dine gi dibi gi debu nyong go ya di ma on ba na nyong mo ga da di ba di 다데네 유리 갑리야 두시네 마샤나 탑면도 시작인 선배게 되네게 삼단체네 디바샤고 다데라나 다데라네 디바샤야 고조시네 디바샤고레 에서지 네 지두시네 삼단고르와 삼단 디바샤고레 송고르와.
The meaning of what we've been looking at here is that through reflecting on momentary change, we gain ever greater certainty that we will die, that there is no stable abiding, and therefore death can come suddenly and unexpectedly. And this then we use as an impetus to use well what remains of this life, however long that may be, and use it well to purify the imprints of non-virtue on our continuum, as well as to refrain from coming under the influence of the afflictions.
Divasha said, Nijiga, some diet, Wada, Jan Mixi, Manzuki, Lagachana Chairman, some diet, some dada disumurwada, Chesa, Yamagi, Denich, Divasa, the Dimundu, Chesa, Notrujesha, Chesa Digi, Tevu di Mahomba, and Yongochi, that in the Shagin Sambegi, some da, Notruria Samata, some diada, and then the Shagin Sambegi, Samata, Shagin some diet, that Divasha, the Garasana, Shalia. Nube Jawa Chigme, Sampe Samda, Gawa Komiata, Jambata, Zewa Komia, and Nanzuki, Gehodubi, the Rwada, some Sosugi, some of the Kiwi, some of the Yane Yandu, died, Divasha, the Chagurwa. Jizadi, Digarisha was in it, Sosugi, some of the Diva, the Kaho, your resident, Nanzu Nubadi, Divasa, Jebinema, Kondra, Semja, Sosjevene, Digi, Dunga, Nyongo, Nubadi, the Nazuk, Semi, the Yudirwada. Chesang some of the Gavi, some of the Bashuk Church, Migi, some of the Kimachuba Shavina, Kasha Gabina, the Gavi, some of Shukchur Tanduko, D tend to be that Migi, some of the Makevache, Sabai Makewa, Nema, Nuba Yuki, Nuba Chun Rogurwa. Chesang Denigida, the Gavi Divasha Sadim. Nema didn't Tibache the Norsha, Chesada Denigida, Dening Shagin, Sampe Samta, Tasha said, Anzuvia, Gauduya did it, Samlinaneta, Suzuki, Kare Jubine, Suzuki, Chiki, Janjo Sem Combina, Mitaba Combina, Tombanyo Combina, Shia, Ninja Combina, and the Divashagor, and the Membiga, Chige, Deba, the Nigi, Sanyeti. Camera Simkea, Tuba, Menetaya, and the Jigger, the Dorje Comdea, and Jigger, Cora, Chubu Pia, Lasso, Tichazada, in Gavasagor, the Gavasadi, the Niki Kuno, the Tichi, the Dibashagor, Dibasha, said Disorada.
The process of purification. This is a mental activity, and the reason is because where does non-virtue abide? It abides on our mind. How was non-virtue created? It was created by our faulty ways of thinking. So being faulty ways of thinking, minds afflicted by the afflictions that perhaps led to verbal or physical behavior, these minds that motivated this harmful action left imprints on our continuum. These have the power to ripen into suffering. So this abides on our mental continuum because that is where it was created. And therefore, the method for purifying them, or at the least for weakening them, means we need to address our own mind. Nothing external, but address our own mind. So therefore, the process of confession or admitting past misdeeds, that in itself is already mental. And then to eradicate or at least overpower past misdeeds, one needs to strengthen wholesome minds, so contrary minds. Because to the extent we strengthen wholesome minds, that serves to weaken, to suppress, to overwhelm the imprints we have from non-virtuous behavior. And how to do so? Well, this is entirely what one's inclination is towards, and this may well vary from day to day. Some may prefer to engage in meditation on love or compassion or impermanence or on emptiness or on bodhicitta. Others may prefer to recite mantras such as Om Mani Padme Hum. Others will prefer to make prostrations or offerings and so forth. What's important, though, is that the mental engagement is strong and sustained and virtuous, because it's that mental engagement that serves to overwhelm the potency that we have on our continuum that arose from the non-virtue. So that then is how the process of purification works.
Andine da usina ge samda kichi jiba da midapa imba du samdana da du se samda jeba che du shine da gyumse samda du da kichi jiba midapa da ngone ra midapa kichi jiba resha sambege da semlia tempuro chi jingeba ni du midapa se de doruwa jeba chena dogora jeba ma jeba samda na dotoya merwa midapa de ngone ra midapa re sambege midapa cheme jingeba nyeba ina 다신 디 도루거래 진짜 다바 다신 맨나 다신 딜리 킹이진 차강게야 말다 다신 미용아서 다신 디에 봐서 다산 디왕게 될때네 차과게야다 디왕게 콘도게 녀모바 망보시게 거봐 진짜 니네기서 미다바 또바나 다신 도루에 다신 도루 다신 디 킹이진 녀모바게 망보시 요지 뉴 로도 거봐 니네서 당한테 미다바 삼당 거래세 대야 제바제 삼다 제바제는 마도 또 투에 매래 제가 미다바 또 바이나 디네 독초 미다바스면 녀모바래 디 라슈기 매바 차로 거봐 제가 디네 자다 저기 곰잡세데 도바길에 계세야디 디로와 디네게 제바제 니 무인예상디 하고도 직도가 직게 와라다 가지고 무인에서 하고요도 니 무인에 하고도 똑바게도 대신에라 하 먹어야기 릭디 매바 차선으로와 녀모바지 방세 매바서 쇠살바다 진짜 두신의 이야기 도고라 디네 자당은 저기 메다바 세야다 당보는 저기 지바 치워 메다바 삼다 치워 메다바마디 저기 통례라로 디네 마삼 땅이 되진 언제는 마지는 로다 다와다마 직지도고도 직교도고 bassam다 디네 삼다 이제 니나 안에 주제다도 삼다 도선의 기지기지 교도요 바디 세우쇼라 배낭아도 다요 정제 강라 땅에 지 남주 땅고라 다요 정제 교고 쇼주고로 가다 제정안도 다딩안 저기 주제지리야 네 세컨드 주제 지 까모 주제도 디날이야 지 교도야 등아 사고도라 다 딜레 교관된 지기판 다요 정제 강라 남주 땅에 디기 뒤서다 쇼지 교고 주고로 근데 미다 봤어야 돼. 데니데 삼다도 계지게 삼다도 저 제장한테 미세디 딜레 교가 주고로 받노. 맞아 하 먹어를 마도 딜레 교가 주고로. 데네 두신 제바제 주시 근데 김제를 맞나 치응고 발라 삼다 바나가라 땅 줘야게 남주다 데네게 줘라 줘야게 교가 뒤실 파 삼다 덴마젠 뒤수소수게 삼 지카사나 디린다 다다다 데리가레 계지게 삼다 두세 삼다 다데네 미다 봐지 오니 레샤 선배가 하고 요도 디네기 미다 디네 하고 요도 디네로디 곰진 야네야데 곰진 누버 숙처다 땅에도 소수게 녀마 다선 숙치 먹어져네 마 다선 마 도로 그래 다선 도바나 다선 딜레기 비교 녀모버릭 되샤 콘롱하게 그 지릭지 망우직 때마게 매바 차르고로 예매바 차르고로 디네서 디바봉 세야디 제차르데 디지기 누바티게 매바 차르고로 디네 삼다제 오다 디바 네 디네 샤고도 선배 삼당고레서 샤고레서 김전도 시당한테 디바세야디 다데네 매바 쇠고레 다데네 매바 마서바나 제마 쇠고 삼되바이나 안데디 유어도제 안 샤고가 마라바이나 디테보딩 아주 마음바는 용어지기레스 디엔자 다된 샤고레서 다가데 랍셔조디 숨어래
So to summarize tonight, when meditating on impermanence, just like with all other analytical meditations, it's imperative that you do so based on reasons. So in the classes, I present a few elementary reasons, but then it's for you in your meditation to start with those reasons, and by repeating the meditation repeatedly, you'll guide yourself to deeper and deeper levels of analysis. And this is what leads to the mind actually changing from a mere intellectual understanding to a realization of the topic. So in the context of impermanence, it's important to reflect on the impermanence of the mind and how our mind changes momentarily. And to do this meditation repeatedly over a sustained period, recognizing how our mind, which minds predominate, also changes over time. Hence, personalities, for example, are not fixed. A genuine way of thinking is not fixed. Our mood, our mental state is not fixed. These change. They change momentarily. And to motivate one to do this meditation, as was mentioned in a previous verse tonight, that it's from our ignorance grasping at permanence that our afflictions such as anger and attachment arise, and thereby we suffer and create the causes for ever more suffering. Whereas to the extent that we meditate successfully on impermanence, this grasping at permanence will be challenged, because you'll recognize that the phenomena change momentarily. They are not permanent, and thereby not relating to them in this wrong way, this mistaken way, and acting more in accordance with reality, our mind will be much calmer, more at ease. Attachment and anger will not arise about situations we relate to as if they're fixed and static. We will rather recognize that they are changing and momentary. Meditating on these topics requires repeated reflection, but using reasons. And the more reasons you use, and the more regularly one does these meditations, one's way of thinking becomes ever more in accordance with reality. And these wrong consciousnesses, this mistaken way of relating to the world, that will weaken. So reflecting on the impermanence of our life, this is quite easy to understand, but we need to bring it to the point where we recognize that death can come at any moment. There is no certainty as to whether the older will die before the younger, the ill will die before the healthy. There is no certainty. And moreover, in addition, when one reflects on impermanence, reflect on time, going from great periods to small periods, and reflecting how, whilst time may appear to us, especially while we're in it, not to be changing momentarily, but rather it appears as if it abides, to recognize that time too changes momentarily. And also, we can use analogies, for example, or not analogies, but illustrations that one sees, perhaps of travel, where through one traveling, one is here now, and in no time one is there, or one was over there and is now over here. And sometimes one travels at great speed, perhaps not us, but there are those who go in rockets to the moon or to the space station, and they travel at great speed. But still, everything in that whole structure is impermanent too. So the purpose of this reflection here is firstly, through reflecting on the impermanence of this life, to give us a continued strength of mind, a continued determination. Secondly, to reflecting further on impermanence, to weaken our grasping at permanence, therefore to weaken the strength of our afflictions, and thereby to lessen our suffering. And thirdly and finally, is to come to recognize that we need to engage in purification right now and consistently, because we do not have any certainty whether we will have the opportunity tomorrow, whether we will have either the good health or still be alive to be able to continue tomorrow. So therefore, one needs to apply oneself right now.
미다베 거시에 봐 기지 교가 되게 주제도 교화줘야 주제 두번씩 승계를 시작 까마지를 지사 두스타데 주제지 교화게는 미다버립니다.
So the Geshe is having some doubt about the time. He's talking about impermanence and time, but he's not sure if his clock is really working. So he just asked me to confirm whether it is 8 o'clock or not. Okay, thank you. Then we'll conclude there for tonight. Thank you.